broadcast will remain available following the conclusion of the meeting. Attendances are as per the record. And item 2, we have apologies and leave of absence from Councillor Berry and Councillor Coetzee and Councillor Sangali this evening. Deputations. We have one deputation this evening, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So rules of deputation are deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those 3 speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on this matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until the administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for the members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. Please be advised the following deputations have been confirmed on item 4.7, consideration of development application for modifications to an existing place of worship and change of use to caretaker's dwelling, DA 2021-2027, lot 444, 32 Bardsley Avenue, Girraween, and lot 443, which is number 34 Bardsley Avenue, Girraween. Speaker, Richard Rodick. Is Richard here, and would he like to come and take the platform? Just tell us your name and address, please. Thank you.
My name is Richard Rodick from Mick Rodick and Associates. Address is at 165 7th Avenue, Inglewood. Yeah. I'm speaking with respect to item 4.7 in support of the proposed Cowarday Missionary Temple at 32 to 34 Bardsley Avenue. I would just like to reiterate some of the points, most of which have been covered in the council report. A place of worship is a current approved use for this site. The proposed modifications retain the current place of worship use with a slight increase in patronage. A new building is required to enable easier compliance with National Construction Code requirements, with the new design allowing the optimal layout to meet the needs of the Cowarday Missionary Temple congregation. The change of use component is a minor in the form of retaining an existing single house to now become a caretaker's dwelling. Modifications were made to the plans post-neighbour consultation after feedback was passed on by council planning staff. We considered the feedback and made the following amendments to the plans. We reduced the overall height of the building such that now only the 2 slender feature towers at the front of the building will exceed the 10-metre maximum building height. This height references to the residential design codes. These towers were well set back from any adjoining residential property. In addition, we increased the first floor setbacks to the rear, the west side boundary to 6 metres and the south side boundary to 7.4 metres. These changes have reduced the bulk of the development and impact on the adjoining neighbours. Visual privacy. The first floor of the building has been designed with minor openings and screening as per the definition of privacy under the residential design codes. Whilst not applicable to the place of worship use class, these windows have been designed as such to ensure no visual privacy amenity impact on any of the adjoining residential properties. Parking. The proposal requires a total of 7 car parking bays in accordance with scheme requirements, with 8 bays provided to ensure there is a surplus. Overflow parking, should this be required, will be in accordance with the current approval for the site via Bardsley Park. Support from the nearby properties. The existing temple members have built a good rapport with many of the surrounding neighbouring properties, given they have been operating at the subject site for many years. The neighbouring properties in support of the proposal include the immediate neighbours to the north and south, as well as a number of properties directly on the opposite side of Bardsley Avenue to the east of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the councillors about that? Okay. I will go to the reports now. Item 4, declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of the interest, are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declaration of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. Our first item tonight is planning and sustainability, and they have 5 items. Which would you like to speak to? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a total of 10 reports from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate tonight. I would like to introduce item 4.1 and Mr. Bowering would like to introduce item 4.7. And we're happy to take questions on any of the other items. So in relation to item 4.1, this item is to present to you the proposed urban forest strategy for Council's final adoption following advertising of the strategy. As you are aware, the purpose of the strategy is to protect and enhance the city's tree canopy cover. It was prepared in response to the community's aspiration for the city to be developed as a sustainable and a green city. The strategy is also an important implementation tool of our local environmental strategy, as well as our climate change strategy. The strategy aims to protect our canopy cover as well as vegetation, to increase the canopy cover, and to work with our community and with other stakeholders such as the state government to achieve this. Importantly, the strategy has been prepared with a focus on the city's available resources. In essence, the strategy is to ensure that there's no net loss of tree canopy cover in established suburbs, that in the first instance, we make sure that there's a minimum of 5% tree cover in all other suburbs and all the suburbs with less than 5% tree cover, and also to increase the tree cover on city-managed land to a minimum of 10%, and then finally to gradually increase this target to ultimately achieve 15 to 20%. 20% is the best practice with local governments in terms of canopy cover. The key components of the strategy are outlined in page 53 to 56 in the agenda, and more detail on the implementation of the strategy through 14 initiatives is included on page 55 and 57 of the agenda. In terms of the advertising of the strategy, 6 submissions have been received during advertising. The submissions are generally supportive of the strategy. Most of the comments are of a technical nature and relate more to the implementation stage of the strategy. In this regard, the strategy has been purposefully developed as a high-level strategy and not as an urban forest plan with lots of detail. Most of the comments received will be considered as part of the planning and design of the 14 initiatives that will implement the strategy. The purpose of the initiatives will be, the progress of the initiatives will be reported back to Council in due course. The strategy will be a living document, and the progress with the implementation of the strategy will be continuously monitored and adjustments made where necessary, taking into account the city's resources. Thank you, Mayor, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Van Hayden. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. An important part of the implementation of the strategy is the street tree planting program. The program's predominantly focusing on targeting suburbs where the tree canopy percentage is under 10%. Is consideration also given to locations that have strategic value, for example, an entrance road to a suburb which may represent or reflect the overall image of that suburb?
Thank you, Mayor. So the strategy itself don't deal with that level of detail, but as you mentioned, as part of the city's tree planting program, the local circumstances are taken into account as part of that. So part of that is to find out where you can actually plant trees, where there's space for trees, and also to document where the existing trees are. So as part of that process, although the focus of that is to focus on heat islands and tree canopy cover, they also consider other things like the local statement, the amenity in the street and entrance statements and things like that. So it is considered as part of that sub-program of the urban forest strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, just a question, if I can, please, regarding the term tree canopy. I think you'd agree that some species of trees, for whatever reason, are better at producing large tree canopies than other species. There are many examples I could give you. And of course, the city itself has a policy which determines which particular species of trees can be planted on council-owned verges, as far as I'm aware. In terms of the policy, does this policy address that issue? In other words, seeking to plant or trees that actually have a large canopy as opposed to a very small canopy? Examples of larger canopies would be canopies created by peppermint trees, which I acknowledge require pruning, and also fig trees, of course, which can get quite large. Well, what's the situation with respect to the policy in that regard? Thanks.
Through you, Mayor. So the strategy don't deal with that level of detail, but as you say, as part of our land development process, we have a list of species that are taken into account that developers can plant. So for the purpose of the strategy, it's all about increasing the tree canopy cover. So not so much about the different species, but that is considered as part of the implementation of it.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Nguyen.
In terms of the proposed location of the tree, is it open to a resident that's affected by the tree planting to reject council planting that tree at that location?
Usually, through you, Mayor, so about a big proportion of the trees that the city plant is actually on request of residents. So we continue to cater for that. That's a big percentage of the 3,000 trees we plant every year. But as part of that, it's also considered. So obviously, people that request trees, they want the trees in their verge. So those are prioritized. And then as part of the audit, the tree survey, it's considered where it can possibly be planted. But we're not aware of specific cases. I can refer to the Director of Assets of where people actively reject trees.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. For the street trees, the policy actually does state that each verge is required to have one street tree. Corner properties should have two. But given that we still got lots of gaps, we, at this point in time, have not been enforcing that each property must have a tree. So we have the street tree program is run in two ways. One is that where residents request a tree. So obviously there is a desire, and then we provide that tree. That's about 600 to 700 trees done every year through that process. And the rest of the trees, we actually identify the gaps, as the acting director was saying earlier from planning, that we identify the gaps throughout the city where there's a space there, where there is no conflict with the adjoining residents, we plant those trees.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Are there any more questions?
Can I just further question?
Okay, Mr. Councillor Nguyen.
So just getting back to scenario, so is it open to a resident to refuse a tree that is in front of their house that we're proposing to plant?
Mr. Singh or Mr. Bat?
Thank you, Mayor. If there's an existing tree, residents cannot object to that one. But as I said earlier, if city chooses to plant tree, residents cannot object under the policy. But as I said, we are not enforcing at this point in time, given that we still got a lot of spaces where we can plant tree without having any conflict with any residents.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've just got one question. Is there any way that you can make this map a little bit larger? Because at the moment, the two deepest red areas seem to be on Pinjar and in the Yanchep State Forest, looking at the maps that we have. And they are the biggest areas. And we're concentrating on, I know our street trees are an issue, and we do need to put some cover over our roads. But these two areas, again, they completely wipe out the main map. But I'm not sure if they're actually there because this map is so small. So if we could, for next week, just expand on the map so that we can actually see where these hotspots really are. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I just want to just mention that as part of once council adopts the strategy, we have about 140 maps that inform the strategy. So those maps will be loaded up to the website, and that would be much easier to manipulate than hard copies. Yeah, so there's a lot of work that went into this in terms of using the Department of Planning, their data, and also WALGA's data, so that will be made available to the public.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions, but just on that last question that Councillor Nguyen was asking for, is it possible then to, sorry, Councillor Hundley, is it possible then, Mr Van Heineken, to put the proposed areas up, the red areas up on the GIS, which is obviously publicly available through our website?
Through you, Mayor, yes, so the maps will be available on GIS. It's a layer of GIS.
Thank you. My question was, I'm totally support of the notion of using trees to try and eliminate some of the heat sink in some of our suburbs. When you say that we're going to look at increasing from 5 to 10 and possibly to 12 or 15 later on, at what stage of the tree growth are you measuring that percentage in the suburb?
Through you, Mayor, so the data, as part of when we implement the strategy, it will be, as I mentioned, it will be continuously updated, so we will track the progress with it. So the Department of Planning, they update their database every few years, so then we would be able to compare earlier versions with further versions, but it is essentially about the total vegetation cover and the total tree cover.
Yeah, I only sort of wondered how that was going to work, because obviously if we plant over the next, say, 5 years, 20,000 trees, which I think we're targeting for, some of those trees are going to be nowhere near maturity. So therefore, we're still going to have a very low percentage, but we might pick it up on the next 5-year cycle. So I'm trying to understand at what point do we say, okay, we must now not do anything in that street or that park for 15 years. Is that how the policy will eventually work?
Through you, Mayor, so we will, what's important is that in terms of the coastal suburbs, there's lots of vegetation, but not a lot of tree cover because of the nature of that. But in other areas, there's lots of tree cover, so we will basically determine the overall, measure the overall impact of it. The difference between the tree planting previously and our tree planting now is we now have the data and we know exactly where the heat islands is. Before, we didn't have that information. So in terms of although we're proposing to plant the same number of trees, it will be much more effective because it will be targeted where it's most needed. And as I mentioned again, also the areas that are less than 5% tree cover, those areas will be prioritised.
Any more questions? We'll move on to item 4.7. Mr Barring.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Aiken. Item 4.7 on tonight's agenda deals with a proposal to demolish a former dwelling which has previously been approved by council to be used as a place of worship and replace that building with a new purpose-built place of worship structure. The
Greg,
application...
can you just, sorry, Mr Barring, can you pause for a minute? Mr Nguyen needs to declare, Councillor Nguyen needs to declare an interest, sorry.
Yes, I do have a financial interest in which the proponent is a former client of my law firm, Legal Care Australia. Because it's a financial interest, I will leave the room.
Sorry, Mr Barring, if you'd like to go ahead now, thank you.
Thank you. The application comprises 2 former residential lots, number 32 and number 34 Bardsley Avenue, Girraween, that are approved as a place of worship utilising the former dwellings. This application arises as the owners have not been able to find an economical or practical solution to modifying the former dwellings at number 34 so as to meet the requirements of the Building Code of Australia due to the classification changing from a residential to a public building standard. The proposed extent of works is to demolish the former dwelling and replace that with a two-storey building with decorative tower elements that signify the purpose of the building as a place of worship. The former dwelling at number 32 Bardsley will be used as a caretaker's dwelling and provide sufficient on-site parking for the proposal. Advertising was undertaken for a period of 14 days by way of letters to adjoining landowners within a 200-metre radius of the subject site and a notice placed on the city's website. 29 submissions were received, with 18 objecting and 11 in support. The main concerns raised during the advertising period relate to the suitability of the place of worship at the site given its location within the residential zone and proximity to residential properties, development being incompatible with the surrounding built form in terms of bulk and scale, concerns relating to overshadowing and privacy concerns, additional traffic congestion in the area, lack of parking bays and additional noise. As noted in the report, the place of worship use is already approved, as it is a use that has been determined as being compatible within the residential zone. In this regard, the matter for consideration tonight is the proposed built form rather than the use. Following public consultation, the applicant worked on developing a set of amended plans, and these are the subject of Council's consideration at attachment 4 on pages 324 to 330. Each of the above matters are responded to in the report, and the amended plans address setbacks, building bulk, overshadowing and privacy. Nearly all building design matters now meet or exceed the relevant criteria. With respect to the level of use and intended capacity of the place, the applicant has proposed limited numbers and hours of operation. This is detailed in the officer's report in the recommendation on page 293. Where it states a maximum of 20 patrons are permitted within the place of worship at building at any one time, which includes 2 staff members, and the operating hours of the place of worship shall be restricted to Monday to Sunday, 6 till 7:30 p.m, with a maximum of 2 services per month. This is generally consistent with the terms of the current approval, and this level of activity will not result in any impacts on adjoining owners by way of traffic. It is apparent that the applicant, through the application process, has amended and improved the plans to address concerns raised with the original proposal, and the result is an application that is considerate of the neighbouring properties and contains the activity to the site through the proposed limitations on numbers and operating hours. The application is therefore recommended for approval on that basis, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr Bowing. Councillor Baker?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Greg, just a question. It seems to me that quite clearly the primary use at the moment is, at least in terms of the approved use, is place of worship. And the plans, I might add, I think are fantastic. The architecture used in the design is wonderful. But I would have thought that a caretaker's residence would be ancillary to the primary use. For example, it's not unusual in many instances, for example, when a Catholic church is built in a new suburb, that the priest's cottage, or whatever you want to call it, is on the same parcel of land, the same title. There's no need for the Catholic Archdiocese of Perth to purchase an adjoining block. That would be the argument here as well. Couldn't it be argued that the caretaker's proposed use of the caretaker facility or the accommodation is ancillary to the primary dominant use, and as such is a residential use? Does a residential use require consent from the city?
And thank you, Chairman. That's essentially the case. The property will be amalgamated because of the relationship of the parking and the building built form, and part of that is to recognise the residential nature of that building as a caretaker's, as a dwelling. There is a specific definition of the use for caretaker's dwelling in the scheme, which that fits with. So it's essentially approving the 2 uses: the change of use of that from public place of worship to caretaker's dwelling.
Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Mayor. Just
Councillor Baker, could you please turn your
I
microphone?
apologise,
Thanks.
Madam Mayor. The the agenda states that the owner of the subject property is Van Dock Nguyen. That person is the registered proprietor of both properties, of course, both parcels of land. But the design plans, and once again, I think the design is fantastic. It states that the actual client for the architect was the entity, the Cadai Overseas Missionary, in brackets, Australia, close brackets, Western Australia Diocese Incorporated. So is it a case where the owner of the land, assuming that the DA is approved, that the owner of the land will still remain as the owner of the land, and that the owner must have some sort of a leasing arrangement, I assume, with the incorporated entity, which will be actually conducting the worship within the place of worship? Please.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be my understanding, that the applicant doesn't necessarily need to be the owner of the property.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, Mr Rowe. Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. A couple of questions that while they have been addressed in the report, I just wanted to put them on the record. Can administration confirm that there have been no complaints or compliance activity at the place of worship in its present form, particularly around noise or traffic congestion?
Thank you for the question. Yes, that's the. There hasn't been any complaints since it has been given approval by council.
Secondly, can administration confirm that the tower structures are not inhabitable, so therefore it limits the privacy impact on adjoining residents?
Yes, I can confirm that, and that they don't meet the definition of a habitable structure. Although the visual privacy standards don't apply under the R codes, it would meet them even if they were habitable and the R codes did apply.
And finally, Mayor, I just wanted to ask, in the report it does acknowledge that the consultation was impacted by the fact that there was delays in letters being sent out by Australia Post. Can administration confirm that responses that were received after the consultation period ended were still considered as part of this report?
Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that. We don't cut off anymore. We will accept all responses provided we have already written the report.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My question relates to the design review panel. Were any comments required or sought from the design review panel based on the magnitude of this particular building, even though it's been approved, the site's been approved, etc.? I'm just wondering whether we got any opinion from them if one was required.
It didn't fit within the scope of the design review panel, which would look at more larger scale developments than this.
Thank you. Councillor Herridge.
Thanks, Mayor. Just in regards to the amalgamation of the two lots, does that have to happen prior to construction? And what would happen if it was rejected?
Thank you for the question. No, I think the wording is prior to occupation of the building. I'm just trying to find the condition. I know it's in this list of 20 or so. And it's not a condition that's particularly difficult, and it's required to affect the development. So the car parking needs to be part of the use. So it's an essential requirement that they be amalgamated.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted a question on clarification. So in regards to the towers, nobody can climb in the towers or use it as a lookout tower, because I know there were some comments from some of the families that do live there. So I just want to clarify that as the first one. And two, that there's also no bells or anything like that that needs human interference to go up and change it, or upkeep, maintenance, that sort of thing.
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. The towers are accessible to that upper level. There's a spiral stair detailed on the plan which gives you access. So yes, you could go up there and look out from the property, but as I said earlier, that would be still compliant with the R code's requirements for visual privacy, given the setbacks from the neighbouring properties. What it's decorated with or what might be placed up there, it's not something that we've assessed or that I can comment on. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any more questions? Thank you. I'll just move through the planning sustainability items. Oh yes, we'll get Councillor Nguyen back. and then we'll move on to item 4.2 once he's back in the room. Okay, do I have any questions on item 4.2, the Alkimos-Eglinton Development Contribution Plan and Annual Review of Costs 2022-23? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Mayor. My question's addressed to perhaps Greg, I think. I think that is the appropriate person. Yes, I referred to the draft contribution plan, in particular the two annexures to it, specifically the document appearing on page 87 of tonight's agenda and the document appearing on page 88. The plan, as named, is referred to as the Alkimos-Eglinton Development Contribution Plan. Yet if you look at page 87, where it sets out the landowner developer map, as it's called, it refers to an estate name, Shorehaven, and another name, which I think is an estate name, Spears. Now, of course, those two names are merely estate names, subdevelopers' names. Both parcels would either be in Eglinton or in Alkimos. Why is it that the plan, in those instances only, refers to the developer name for those two parcels of land? Once again, the Spears subdivision and also the Shorehaven residential subdivision.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Would Mr Van Hayden like to answer that? Thank you.
Mayor, I will have to take that one on notice. So I can just maybe clarify that the DCP covers Alkimos-Eglinton, the whole area. Sorry, if I could just add to that, the district structure plan for that area, it covers the whole district structure plan area.
That's right. And just to further explain as well, just for the sake of clarity.
Councillor Baker.
Once again, the other suburbs, of course, or districts, suburbs, districts, we call them districts as a matter of technicality. There are various developers there which have different estate names, of course. It can be very confusing for many new homeowners thinking that the estate name is their suburb and they can't find a postcode. And of course, maps of this kind further compound that confusion, particularly when it appears in an official document published by the city. So just another question, please, Mayor. As I said at the outset, I've got another question regarding page 88. It's an old chestnut that keeps coming up, and this document is attached to the proposed developer contribution plan. Once again, if you look at the the northwestern section of the map, you'll see there are what appear to be two separate and distinct marinas jutting out into the sea, and they are within the district of Eglinton. Now, the developer contribution plan, amongst other things, makes an assessment or seeks to make an assessment as to the future facilities, etc., that will be required for, in this case, two districts combined, and also all the other types of infrastructure.
Councillor Nguyen, excuse me, Councillor Baker. Councillor Nguyen, can you just come back? Gentlemen, if you would like to leave, and ladies, if you'd like to leave now, you're quite welcome to leave because we finished discussing the item. You don't have to stay to listen to the whole agenda. Okay? Thank you. Oh, the decision is next week, yes. Councillor Baker, would you like to continue with your question? Sorry for interruption.
In a nutshell, I think this issue has arisen before, of course, and the way the structures are depicted, they appear to be marinas, plural, not a singular marina. But is it still the case that these marinas, or this marina, is still part of the master plan, so to speak, for Eglinton, as depicted on attachment 3, I think it is, on page 88 of the agenda? Please.
Mr Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, Councillor Baker is correct. This was mentioned before when Council considered the coastal management plan. So as part of the coastal management plan, when we prepared that, we liaised with the developer for the marina, and the developer confirmed that they are still planning the marina. So although it was indicated on the district structure plan, they confirmed that they are still planning to have that. So the decision was made to, if the developer is still aiming to deliver that would be indicated on the plans. I can maybe just also mention that the state government is currently busy with reviewing the district structure plan. So that probably will just renew the issue, and that will be looked at as part of the review of the structure plan as well.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Yes, councillor Baker.
Thank you. Another question, if I can, please, sir. Thank you, Mayor. On page 89 of the agenda, there's reference to what's titled the capital expenditure plan for this particular development contribution plan. In relation to that table, it makes reference to the Alkimos Surf Lifesaving Club. Upon my reading of the table, it would seem that that Surf Lifesaving Club will not be constructed in terms of financial years until at least 30 June 2030. Is that the case? 2030, I should say. 2030. Is that the case? Or have I misread that? You'll see the grey band under the financial years.
Through you, Mayor, this plan indicates when we will commence with the planning of it. Sometimes it can be 3 years before we actually construct it, that we start planning and procurement and all of that. So that table indicates the start date and the expected delivery date. But as part of this annual review, because there was substantial price increases in terms of the infrastructure costs, we are looking at doing a major 5-year review of this plan to update it. So as part of that review, we will be looking at potentially pushing out the timing of some facilities potentially, but we will look at that, and council will consider that as part of that process.
Supplementary, please.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Yes, councillor Baker.
Yeah, just can you please confirm for the record that the term delivery date and the term completion date, that's the term that's used in the agenda in this table, completion date, there's an overwhelming irresistible inference to the average ratepayer that completion date and delivery date means the date upon which the club rooms will be constructed. At the moment, they have a large 32-foot sea container exposed to the elements and a smaller sea container under an annex or lean-to, so to speak. So can you just clarify, because my understanding is that this date, of the maximum completion date of 30 June 2030 is out of sync with the long-term financial plan in terms of the timeline for the construction of this facility. We please confirm that the completion date is the proposed completion date of the Alkimos Surf Lifesaving Club's club rooms and related facilities proper, please.
Thank you, councillor Baker. Thank you, Mr Van
Thank you.
Hayden.
I will refer the question to the Director of Community.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. So in regard to this particular facility, as Mr Van Hayden has indicated, we will be doing a review of the Northern Coastal Growth Corridor Community Facilities Plan, which may impact on the delivery timeframes. The other issue with the Alkimos Surf Lifesaving Club is that it's going to be some time, we expect, before we can actually get access to the site where the surf club is to be built. So that may actually result in further delays to the delivery of this project. We're hoping that when we do the review of the community facilities plan, we will have further information now that there has been some confirmation in regard to Water Corporation activity in that particular location. But one of the bigger issues for us at the moment is the accessibility of the site.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, councillor Baker.
Thanks, Madam Mayor, through the chair to Ms Terling. What is the explanation for the delays in getting access to the site? Is it a case where obviously there are no roads to get to the site proper? My understanding is that the site of the club rooms proper will be a different site, close by, but a different site to the existing sea container covered with a roof.
Thank you, councillor Baker. Mrs Terling?
Yes, through you, Mayor, yes, it will be a different location. There are no roads there, and I don't believe that the land has yet been made available either. There's certainly the major issue with this particular facility is the accessibility of the land and the site.
One more supplementary, I promise, please, Ms.
Just a moment, councillor Baker. Thank you, Mrs Terling. The CEO would like to make comment as well.
Thank you, Mayor. I might just ask Ms Terling just to expand a little bit on the significant issue in terms of waiting for the Water Corp to provide clarity, because that my understanding that's been one of our more substantial issues that's been resolved in the last sort of year and a half.
Yes, through you, Mayor. So the issue is that the Water Corporation were not supportive of developing the site or allowing development in that area until they had confirmation on the development of a desalination plant on the site, which has now been confirmed. However, we're not sure what the timing for that is and how quickly that means we will get access to the site.
Thank you, Mrs Terrelink. Yes, Councillor
Thanks,
Baker.
Mayor. Just one final question. Just to be direct and blunt, I apologise. Is there any suggestion that the developer is dragging the chain in any respect or regard, or are these delays, so to speak, in terms of getting access to the site, attributed to third parties other than obviously the city and the developer, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Mrs Terrelink?
Yes, through you, Mayor. Yes, that's the case.
Do we have any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Just I guess, a concern. We all know, Mr Van Heineken, that the state has changed the developer contribution policy. And whilst there's dollar values attached to that, I don't think that'll affect this. The bit that might affect these existing developer contribution schemes is the fact that the state's making it very clear that it needs to have staged processes on when these facilities are going to be built. So when there's so many people or population within an area, you must complete this building, you must complete this. You said earlier in an answer to Councillor Baker that this structure plan or DCP is going to be revisited shortly. So if it's going to be reassessed or renegotiated, will that then fall into line with the new DCP requirements requested of the state?
Through you, Mayor. So the Alkimos Eglinton and the Yanship Two Rocks DCPs, they are both relatively contemporary DCPs, so they comply fully with the new state planning or with the state planning policy. Whilst in East Wanneroo, that was based on our planning scheme before the state planning policy was in place, the updated one. So as part of the 5-year review, we don't anticipate that the list of facilities included in this DCP would change, because that would require an amendment to the planning scheme, which is like a new DCP essentially. So, but we don't foresee any significant changes to this one, because the main change from the state planning policy that is introducing is that its DCP needs to have an operating period. This one's got an operating period. And also this has been written in such a way that it complies with the state planning policy. I could maybe just mention that the state planning policy associated guidelines for the policy indicated that there will be a cap of $5,000 per dwelling that can be paid for by a DCP. It can't go over 5,000. So that is a potential risk for our DCPs that relate to community facilities such as this one. At the moment, it's not an issue, but when costs escalate into the future, that may be an issue. But we will have to consider that as part of a future review of the DCP.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. The CEO wants to speak to the item as well, the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to expand on Mr Van Hyman's comment in terms of we are concerned about what the annual review mechanism will be on the cap. I think this report and others clearly highlight the escalation in costs, and if there isn't an appropriate review of the cap each year to accommodate changes in building construction index and so forth, then as Mr Van der Heijn explained, we then could run into an issue of the facilities exceeding the money available to be brought in because of the cap. And we are advocating through WAGA quite heavily to have a review mechanism disclosed.
Thank you, Mr Sims. Thank you, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My other question goes back to another question that Councillor Baker was asking, to do with the marinas or the possible future marinas. Whether they happen or not is another story. And I know they're in the structure plans. We all know what's happened to Mindara Marina. Once you lift the land level out of the water, it becomes the responsibility of the local authority because you're at the high water mark. So therefore it becomes legally under our jurisdiction for roads, paths, and all what happens there. I guess my question to you is, if that was to go ahead as a marina, would that then have maybe a localised structure plan to cover off, developer contributions or something like that?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor. So the DCP was prepared based on, as I mentioned, the district structure plan, and because the district structure plan shows the marina, we acknowledge that in the DCP. But yeah, there would be the district level structure plans at the district level, and then there's local structure plans dealing with the smaller areas or the precincts, and the marina could potentially form part of that. There is an existing structure plan at the moment, but that could be reviewed and updated as well closer to the time. The developers indicated that within the next 10 years, they're planning to progress the marina. So, but if that doesn't happen, we have to reflect that in the planning documents.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a question arising from what Councillor Miles raised a few seconds ago. You've said the developer will consider, or at least provide further information regarding its intentions regarding a marina or marinas. Looking at the plan, it seems that one such marina appears to be a marina proper, but the other is just a small boat harbour, without splitting hairs. But of course, historically, we're aware that with the Mandari Marina, it was developed by the Smith Corporation, which went into liquidation in due course. Is it fair to say that this marina will be a privately developed marina, as opposed to a marina built, constructed, managed by the state government through its Department of Transport portfolio, please?
Through you, Mayor, I'm not aware of whether it's going to be private or state government. I suspect it is private, but we will have more information closer to the time. We did liaise with I think it was Eglinton Estates, and they indicated that they are, actively planning for this. So I'm not quite sure about the details of that, but we can find out more.
We're just talking about the DCP review, so we need to kind of keep the questions within the subject. Is this within the subject of item 4.2?
Yes, if I can, please, Mayor. Yes, the marina is within the subject. The actual plan for the marinas appears as attachment to the contribution plan. If I can, please, Madam Mayor, just a further question.
Just a quick question.
Quick one. There's no early indication at this very early stage as to whether the marinas or small boat harbour or marina will also incorporate residential dwellings around its perimeter. Do you have any indications to whether that is a possible future intention of the developer, please?
Councillor Baker, that's outside the scope of the DCP. We have no idea because the final detailed plans and draft has been done. The CEO would like to speak to this as well.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. If it assists, I think the purpose of this report is to review the infrastructure contained within the Alkimos Eglinton Developer Contribution Plan. I think, Councillor Baker, your questions might be more appropriately at the point that the structure plan comes to review, which would, in quite detail, examine the appropriateness of a marina and council's liability and response. But it's not officially captured that we will collect fees from the DCP for within this period.
I apologise. It's just that the marinas are included in the structure planning plan document. Thanks.
Any more questions? Okay, so I'll move on to item 4.3, the Yanship 2 Rocks Development Contribution Plan, Annual Review of Costs 2022-23. Any questions on this item? No questions. Item 4.4, East Wanneroo Cells 1 to 9 Developer Contribution Arrangement, Annual Review of Costs 2022-23. Yes, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got two questions on this item. My first one is on page 118. I just want to clarify that Amendment 200 in this report is about the Lot 9000 site just north of the Wanneroo Town Centre.
Through you, Mayor, that amendment applies to the whole structure plan area. So the Lot 9 is only the structure plan relates to the area to the north. The surveyed land, Lot 9000, is part of the activity centre, the Wanneroo Activity Centre.
Okay, thank you.
So it relates mostly, Stockland is the main developer in that area, it's to the north.
Oh, so that's including Wanneroo and Signage, sorry. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. And my second question is, with these DCP projects that have been identified in this report, what council mechanism can be used to bring forward these projects like acquiring land or constructing a road, for example?
Mr Van.
Sorry, could I ask that you repeat that question, please?
Yep. So with these projects that have been identified in the DCP, what council mechanism can be used to bring forward these projects like acquiring land or constructing a road, for example?
Through you, Mayor. So that will depend on the specific issue. So if it's historical public open space, that can be, it's a financial arrangement. But if it's construction of a road, for instance, that we may be more dependent on the state government and their timing, like minor roads, for instance. So depending on the issue, we are intending to prioritise all the infrastructure because our intent is to close as many of the DCPs as possible. But we need to make sure that we've got enough money in the DCPs to cover all the infrastructure required.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Councillor
Sorry,
Rowe.
Madam Mayor. Could I just ask another question on?
Quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just querying because that Dundebar Road widening, obviously there's no, it just says between 2022 and 2025. So is there something we are waiting on, or is it just a matter of slotting it into a budget, for example?
I can refer the question to the Director of Assets.
Mr Singh.
Sorry, Mayor, can I just have the question again, please?
Yep, so it's just in regards on page 118, it says the Dundebar Road widening and duplication project is the most significant remaining work left between 2022 and 2025. So is there something we're waiting on to get that as soon as possible now that that's the last project for that cell?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct, but I can provide more information as part of the briefing session notes about the schedule for the design and construction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. The agenda in the report refers to ongoing discussions with landowners in cell 6 and 7, which has the strategic value of the future Nangara Road realignment with Whitfords Avenue. It says that discussions are ongoing with those landowners. Can administration provide an update with what stage those discussions are at?
Thank you.
For you, Mayor, we'd be happy to provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Councillor Civic.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as a point of clarity and to try and, I guess, finalise these cells as quickly as we can, and I guess that's administration's aim. But how close are we to getting to the actual remaining developers to come to any special arrangements with them so that the actual cells can be closed and then we can actually deal with them separately? Are we going to look at that in the future as a matter of clarity? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor. So what we are proposing is that most of the contribution rates remain the same. So that may lead to excess funds in different cells. So we're proposing that we finalise the infrastructure, make sure that we've got enough money covered by the DCP to finalise this infrastructure. And then when we've done that, we close the cells and we return any excess. That will reduce the city's risk to any financial any shortfalls. But in terms of, generally speaking, what we're looking at, that the residential ones, we're looking at closing them between 2 and 5 years, and the 2 industrial ones, we're looking at between 5 and 10 years. But they're all, as you can see in the report, they're all very different in terms of that. But we are looking at closing, and that's a requirement as well of the new state planning policy to close these as soon as possible. In terms of what we're also looking at as part of that is to make sure that when we close the DCPs, that the people that haven't developed, the old out land developers, they may not develop, some of them might not develop in 20 or 30 years or might have no intention to develop. So to be equitable to the people that have contributed as part of the DCP, we need to find a mechanism to make sure that they also similar, pay equitably to the DCPs. So that potentially or most likely will be legal agreements with those landowners. But we're looking at that equity then who paid already and people that still need to pay. But it's also important that we don't keep them open because there's an administration fee of about 70,000 a year for a DCP, and that's not fair to keep it open that everybody have to pay to the admin fee and only for a few holdout landowners. So that's why we're seriously looking at that.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Mr Miles, Councillor Miles, did you have a question? I thought you had your hand up there. Okay, thank you. I'll move on to item 4.5, Local Planning Policies 4.1 and 4.13, Review and Environment Policy. Any questions? No question? 4.5. Okay, no questions. I move on to 4.6, Preparation of Amendment number 196 to District Planning Scheme number 2, Resolution of Scheme Anomalies and Part Zoning Normalisation affecting land in the Carramar, South Tapping and North Agreed Structure Plan number 21B area. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mayor. My question goes to our planning administration is, I guess, the unintended consequences that arise from these tidy-up processes, which we had with 172. Now, this particular amendment, one of the items I noticed in here that I do have a concern about is the fact that there is a corner shop in Carramar at the moment on golf links. They are operating, they make bubble tea and the like. There's often a sign up to say. But in here, it's sort of saying that whilst you're going to try and, you're going to take their use and put it into the new structure plan, but you're also commenting in this report that they're not exactly operating within the parameters. Can you, because they're not a takeaway drive-through service, so what does administration mean by that?
Thank you. I can clarify. So in the report, what I've tried to detail for council is that we're aware of the use. The use is approved in the structure plan. So there is in the structure plan the allowance for a corner store, which specifically prohibits takeaway food. And that's been the subject of compliance action at the premises in recent times. So we're aware of that issue, but with this normalisation, what we're saying is the process of normalisation is simply to take what's in the structure plan today and move those provisions into our scheme in one go, without considering the merit of that for this in terms of the particular issue. So that's the proposal. So what council has the opportunity to do, once this is initiated, if it is initiated, if the owner makes a submission, council can make a recommendation to the minister, to the department, about whether or not it wants to modify those current provisions to perhaps potentially allow the use to operate in the way it's operating, or to retain the current restrictions under the structure plan. So this creates the opportunity for council to consider the situation and maybe change the planning framework for that property.
Thank you, Mr Bowring.
The other, I guess the other issues I have, this obviously is going to be covering the rural Carramar areas as well. When I looked at the map, those residents in there are highly committed to their lifestyle, and we know that there's always been a couple of new builds gone on in that area. By changing their use from what they have at the moment to, I think you're saying rural, to residential, R30, that's probably going to allow more uses within Carramar rural. Mr Barry?
Thank you.
Thank you. If you're referring to page 271 of the agenda, that shows the area that this amendment would apply to. That's the existing, so essentially what this is doing is taking what's in the structure plan today, the current zonings and the current densities, and moving them across into the scheme. So it's not changing them, they're the existing densities that apply today, and we're just changing which document they're referenced in, essentially. So it doesn't actually, my understanding is it's not applicable to the rural Carramar, the special rural zones, the 2 hectare properties I think you're referring to. It's only the residential portions to the south of that. You can see where I think it's the golf course is to the north.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Any more questions on this item? Thank you. I'll move on to the next item, which is 4.8, proposed repeal of the city's extractive industries local law 1998. Any questions? Item 4.9, proposed repeal of the city's local science law 1999. Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. And I know a big issue in this report is referring to the fact that even though this proposed repeal has been put before us, that any key violations or anything like that are covered by other pieces of local law or policies and frameworks. However, I do have one question about election signage in particular, and it is topical, given that we've just had an extraordinary election, but also have had 4 elections, 1 federal, 1 state and 2 local, in the last 2 years. Can administration advise how many complaints were received during the recent mayoral election campaign, what compliance action was taken, and whether mechanisms are available to address potential violations of signage rules in the potential absence of this legislation?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Ms Terrelink, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I can probably answer the first 2 questions. I'm not sure I can answer the third because I think that's related more to the local law repeal. But in terms of the first 2 questions, we certainly did receive complaints from the public about the election signage. I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but we can put that in the briefing notes. In regard to compliance actions, normally what we would do is certainly if the signs are posing a safety risk, and by that we mean if they're interfering with sight lines for drivers or they're in inappropriate locations, we will ask that they be removed straight away, and if they're not, we will impound the signs. If the signs are not causing a risk to the public, we would normally contact the person who owns the sign and ask them to remove it. And again, if the sign is not removed and it is causing a hazard, we will remove it and impound it. We do also write to all of the candidates in the elections as well to let them know what the provisions of the city's policies and procedures and local law is in regard to signage in the lead up to elections, so that they're aware of what those requirements are.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Any more questions? I'll go to Councillor Wright first.
Actually, I do have one. Councillor Rowe sparked something. If we repeal this local law, so if provisions are broken or not followed, what are the penalties for people that don't follow?
Mr Bowring?
Thank you. Depends on which provisions. So in the public space, it's under the local laws. So the penalties that apply under the local government public places local law would apply. And where it's on private property, then the penalties and enforcements are through the Planning and Development Act. So we have a clear separation and clear process.
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Have you finished?
Yeah, so if it was on, say, public property, for example, do you know what the current penalties are for that? Or
5,000.
Mr Bowring?
We can certainly provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Just in terms of the fines you've referred to, who would be the lucky recipient of the fine? Would it be the candidate or the person who placed the sign? And how do you prove that? Also, what do you say in circumstances where a candidate has erected, with his or her helpers, 50 corfleets, the election day passes, they can't be bothered removing the signs, they just leave them there and say, well, the rangers will pick them up, they'll impound them, they're not going to pay $700 to get rid of these signs, we'll never use them again. Perhaps if the candidate was unsuccessful, perhaps. So how do you deal with that factual scenario, please?
Mr Bowring.
Thus the reason to get rid of the local law. I'm afraid I'd have to defer that. Our Manager of Governance isn't present, but perhaps the CEO can throw me a lifeline.
I think the CEO is going to help us with that one. Thank you.
Well, can I first of all thank Councillor Baker for the question?
Anytime, sir, anytime.
And look, unfortunately, Mr Berkeley Hill isn't in chamber tonight. I'll take that on notice and provide some scenario options as to what recourse is open to council under the planning policies and public places local law.
Yes, Councillor Baker.
I think Councillor Newen had a question.
Councillor Newen.
Part of the local law, there is a section under Part 7 involving penalties. And it's got penalties where a person who commits an offence under this local law shall be liable upon conviction, a penalty of not exceeding $5,000. Would that be right that someone who breaches this local law could be fined up to $5,000?
Mr Bowring.
Yes, that would be correct if the magistrate did convict them of the offence and impose the full penalty.
So if we were to repeal this local law, is there provisions in another local law that would allow council to continue to impose this penalty? And if so, under what provision?
Mr Bowring.
Thank you. Yes, so that would be the Public Places and Local Government Property Local Law 2015.
Okay.
And I think just referring to the report, and there's a couple of other listings there on page 354 and 355 of the agenda. Public Places Guidance in Signage Reserves Policy as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
And just a further question. Under Part 7, under remedy for breach, there's also allowance for removal of signs from public property. Is there an equivalent provision in another act that allows council to remove that if we were to repeal this?
Mr Bowring.
Yes, that's correct. That would be the same. So the Public Places and Local Government Property Local Law.
Because I can imagine, with the number of elections that we've had and the upcoming elections, there would be potential breaches in the future, and also from the previous election as well, there may be some election signs that are still there. So I wonder if the cities are taking any steps to enforce that.
Mr Bowring. Or Ms Terralink, is that for you with the Rangers?
Through you, Mayor, we have had some complaints from residents around removing signs that have been left from previous elections, and again we ask the candidate if they will kindly remove the signs, and if they don't within a certain period of time, then the Rangers will go and remove the signs and impound them, and then there is a fee to have the signs released.
Thank you, Ms Terralink.
And for the record, I haven't received those calls yet, so...
Are you admitting?
I'm sorry, Councillor Newen, we're not going to discuss individual cases here. Are there any more questions to be asked about the repeal of this policy? Yes, Councillor Truby.
I nearly got completely demoted there. Look, just to put a bit of an underline, bold, italicised full stop under this, the approach, and I always find it interesting, and I can say I've never put one sign out in the past or since 1999, so I just put that out there, but I do find it interesting where many of the signs do appear to be placed in locations that are in breach of the city's local laws, and it's a very interesting phenomenon when some of the candidates may well be sitting as the governing board in charged and empowered to control those local laws. And it does also appear that it doesn't seem to be a very punitive approach to dealing with the issue of illegally placed signs. So my question's this. is the city able to provide a response as to the number of signs currently out there, and if it intends to provide the compliance to the full extent of the current law, and if not, why not?
Thank you, Councillor Treby. Ms Terrelink?
Yes, through you, Mayor. Short of doing an audit of all the public places in the city, I guess we rely on complaints being made in regard to the signs, or if the rangers observe during their patrols that signs are where they shouldn't be, then certainly we do, as I've indicated, impound those signs, and if the signs are to be released, we would release them. We have had similar questions around other signs for businesses. And I guess if we were to take that, we take an education approach in the first instance. If we were to take the more punitive approach, that would need to apply across the board in regard to signs that were in breach of the city's local laws.
Thank you. Councillor Treby.
It's actually Deputy Mayor, but don't worry.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor Treby.
It is interesting because it doesn't seem to be fairly weighted one way or the other. It does seem to be a very softly approach. And it also does seem to be the case that often with that approach, the message cannot clearly or may not clearly get through, as you will have successive candidates who run successive elections. But I just reinstate the question. What is the reason that compliance isn't provided? And it's not that difficult to actually get any sort of a detail on where they are, because we have a number of city staff driving around the city on a daily basis. And getting back to, if they're not being fully extended to the extent of the local law, if not, why not?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Ms Terrelink, do you have a response to that?
Thank you, Mayor. We have taken the approach, as I've indicated, around education in the first instance. If Council would like us to be taking a more punitive approach, then we can certainly consider that in the lead up to the next election, noting that that would apply to signs across the board and not just to election signage as well.
I think Mr Sims, CEO, would like to speak to this as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just supplementary to the advice from the Director of Committee in Place. Across all our local laws, there is a judgment call based on public interest in assigning resources to achieve compliance. Council has a compliance policy framework. But I think, as Ms Terrelink said, they're always open to Council to review from time to time. But it is often based on complaints and action of complaints. However, I will reflect on the discussions that have been shared with me tonight during the briefing session and confer with Ms Terrelink in terms of what our next action will be, specifically about election signs, in light of the discussion that councillors have shared with us this evening.
Thank you, Mrs CEO. Any further questions to this item? Yes, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to make a statement. I think as
sorry, you can't make a statement.
Can I not make
it's
a
questions at briefing time.
Okay, I will make it a question. As councillors, we all have an ethical line which we toe. So if we toe that line and then breach it by leaving signs out, at that point there does need to be some provision that the signs get hauled in and that particular person gets a punishment or certainly something. So my question is, can we do that without nanny stating every single person for the poor decisions of one person?
Councillor Huntley, yeah, I'll pass that on to the CEO.
Thank you, Mayor. In the main, Council adopts local laws, and then administration's task is to enforce those local laws in accordance with Council's policies. and there is a deliberate separation of the role of making the local law by the council and then the administrative function of discharging and achieving enforcement. And I think the Director of Community and Places advised that administration will provide you some additional feedback in terms of how we achieve compliance with local laws, because at the end of the day, the local laws apply to all of the community and population within the City of Wanneroo that the local law applies to.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Your question.
Yeah, just one further question. We noticed that when election campaigns are being run by other suburbs, their signs do go out. Can we compare our local laws with their local laws and see what differences of ours? Because I do believe we had a policy where we weren't allowed to put out signs anywhere within Wanneroo unless it was on a private area. Is that correct?
Mr Bowring?
I'm not familiar with the policy to that effect. I think the signs local law has been in operation for some time. The planning framework has as well. So I'm not familiar with an operational policy to that effect.
Can I just state that this is to repeal the law? It's not discussing the law, because this is covered, if I take correctly, in other formats of law. So we need to be looking at the other parts of our local law if we want to discuss this. This is just about repealing this because it is repeating what we've got in other laws. Is that correct, Mr Bowring?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's exactly the point of simplifying and reducing some of the red tape around signage by removing this local law.
Thank you. So we'll move on to Health and Compliance, item 4.10, Proposed Private Property Repeal Local Law 2022. Any questions on that item, please? No questions. We'll go on to item 4.11, which is Assets. Thank you, Mr Singh. Mr Singh, are there any items you'd like to speak to?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to briefly introduce item 4.13 and be happy to take questions on the other two as well. Item 4.13 is about the tender report for the Mindari Breakwater Works. Council may recall there was a report presented to Council back in last year in October, and there were a couple of resolutions from that one. One was to engage with the community on the project details, and the second was to prepare a funding submission seeking 50% contribution toward the project from the state government. Both resolutions have been implemented. We've taken action on that one. We engaged with the community and also have made a submission to state government for the 50% funding contributions. Addressing the second point first, we haven't had a response yet on the funding submission, but we continue to advocate on Council's behalf, requesting that funding. The community engagement was completed in March this year. Generally, there was a support for the project. There were some questions about the construction technique and how the impacts to the adjoining residences will be managed, which is part of our construction tender methodology, which will be covered. The main question which came out of the community engagement was regarding the loss of parking bays in Alexandria View and how they will be accommodated. The design for this project included expanding Clayton Beach car park by adding extra 16 bays there. There was a couple of objections from the members of community, and we committed to them to undertake if there are any other possibilities or any other impacts as a result of that additional bays at Clayton Beach car park. But we've done that work, and those parking bays are required to meet the demand, and we can construct those bays by expanding the car park to the western side. So we have advised the 20 people who attended the community engagement session that this report is coming to Council tonight and coming to Council meeting next week, so that they were made aware that we will consider your comments, and then if any changes are required, we'll make those changes. As a consequence of doing our review, there are no changes. Regarding the tender itself, we received one tender. A tender does provide value for money in this current market. The tenderer has done coastal management works for the city before by undertaking groin construction at Queens Beach. This is a WA limestone. They do have local material source of supply, which they will be using for this particular site. The original schedule which we were intending was to undertake this work over 2 summers, given due to the calmer coastal conditions. But the contractor, the tenderer has actually provided their own methodology on program. They are not available to start work in 2022, so they'll be starting work January, February 2023. But given they have given the methodology and they're confident, they can undertake work during winter period as well. So work still be undertaken over 2 financial years. Now they'll be continuous from January to December next year. Still be done over 12 months. So previously the intention was to do some works in summer, forthcoming summer, have a retreat, and then go back again the following summer to take the advantage of calmer coastal conditions. But the contractor's view is that they can do the work throughout the 12-month period as a continuous project. So that's the tender report on that one, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Mayor. Mr Singh, paragraph 2 of the report on page 429 states that, amongst other things, of course, well, gives a very brief précis of the history of this groin or marina. It states that in 2005, the breakwater and groin were vested in the city of Wanneroo, correct? Yes.
Through the Mayor, yes.
Yeah, and that was by the state government, correct?
Through the Mayor, I'll just briefly expand on that one. The previous reports did cover the historical, how this came about to the city. When the Mindari breakwater was initially developed, there was an agreement between state government, City of Wanneroo, the then City of Wanneroo, and the developers. The developers were meant to construct and maintain the breakwater and the marina facilities up until 1999. From 1999, the maintenance obligation passed on to state government. In 2005, under that agreement, the responsibility passed on to the city.
Yeah, thank you. And this is what I'm trying to understand. I don't know what the rationale was used at the time back in 2005 when the city agreed to have the marina vested in it. It's not as if there was a gun held to the city's head, I would have thought. I would have thought that any deal as such would have a deal in perpetuity, so to speak, that the state government would pay for half of the periodic refurbishment costs, which are damn expensive. What was, I'm not aware as to whether you were actually employed by the city back in 2005, but just wondering, what's your understanding as to the reasoning, perverse or otherwise, that was used to agree to voluntarily accept the vesting of an asset that will cost $300,000 every couple of years to maintain, please?
Mr. Singh.
In ratepayers' money, I might add.
Mr. Singh.
Through you, Mayor, yes, I was employed at the city in 2005, even 10 years before that. The agreement which we had with the state government, the then City of Wanneroo and the developer set out how the maintenance obligations will be passed on. The breakwater actually has created a management order which was passed on to the city. When you go out there, you'll see there's a road built on top of the breakwater wall. So there was a management order. So Alexandria View is City of Wanneroo's road built on top of breakwater. So as part of the management order, the obligation for that land and what's below the land passed on to the city. City of Wanneroo had argued with state government in past, tried to ask the state government to take that obligation for breakwater maintenance back to state government. That had been declined. There have been formal approaches prior to 2005 as well. And after, I think, 2011, 2012, we undertook, given that it was our responsibility as such, we undertook a maintenance management plan, which highlighted significant works which were required to bring the marina into a safe state, the breakwater itself into a safe state. At that time also, there was extensive discussions with the state government departments to see if we can ask the state government to take the responsibility for maintaining the breakwater. We were happy to continue maintaining the road, but a breakwater for them. But I think state government's view has been that given that there was an agreement struck at the time of development, it is the city's responsibility. And that's where the matter has been.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Just a supplementary, Mr. Singh. I note, of course, that the city has made a request to the state government and the federal government for funding. No funding has been forthcoming, of course, not even an inkling of funding. And I acknowledge, of course, that paragraph 3 of the recommendation requested the city write to the state government to try and milk them for some cash rather than falling back on ratepayers. The point is this, on the basis that the city is unsuccessful in obtaining a contribution from the federal government or the state government, is it the case that the city or the city's ratepayers will have to carry the can? And also, is it unusual in any event, once the thing's built, for the state government to then decide to chip in funds towards its construction, which by then would have been completed, or maintenance and repairs, which would have been completed? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Yes, Mr Singh.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, I think the point which city had to consider is it is the city's asset, and we had to make sure that the asset is kept in safe condition. So this breakwater actually is providing road access to several properties to the east of the road. So we need to be mindful of that, how we maintain the integrity and safety of the structure. The structure had deteriorated to a certain point where intervention is necessary. Given the previous approaches with state government, the response was that it is City of Wanneroo's asset, City of Wanneroo needs to look after it. The approach we have taken is we have demonstrated to state as well that it's a joint obligation from maintenance point of view. It was, given that up until 1999, the developers were meant to maintain, which they did. Then they passed on to state government. State government then maintained it from 1999 to 2005. And the documentation which we have seen does not indicate extensive maintenance undertaken. So our view is in that case is that the lack of maintenance, strictly in accordance with maintenance management plans, could have deteriorated to the condition of the structure which is we find it now. But again, going back to the point, it's our City of Wanneroo's asset to protect City of Wanneroo's ratepayers from any potential liabilities. We have to act, and we can't keep on waiting for state government in that respect not to do the work. The meetings we had, the CEO, myself, had meetings with the Department of Transport, the Director General of Transport. We outlined all of that, and the suggestion from them was that go away and do the design, which we did the design, did the feasibility, all the coastal data collection, everything else, did the design, prepared the cost estimates, and then we have provided funding submission to them. It is more of our request rather than a saying demand, that based on that the demand wasn't accepted previously. So the idea for now is that we work with the state government. We have worked with the Transport Department Coastal Engineering section. They had input in the development of the design specification and also in the tender evaluation as well. So they've been fully informed. Now the point is for the state government to consider that, given that state government also had a maintenance liability for 6 years, since then it has been passed on to us, that we are requesting them to contribute to the project.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The boats that are berthed at Mandari Marina, they obviously pay the marina a rental per year or whatever the case might be. Does the city get part of that rental from the boats through the marina, through rates or another kind of charge that we can actually benefit from it in any way?
Mr Singh?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, no. The answer is no on that particular question. The city is responsible for the breakwater structure, and there's a northern groin and a boardwalk which is just to the east of the breakwater structure itself. The rest of the assets are privately owned by the Mandari Marina.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any more questions? Okay, thank you. Start at 4.11, petition PT 010822, request for traffic management scheme on Beachside Parade Yanship between Zamia Rise and Templetonia Boulevard. Are there any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, or Mayor, I should say. Yes, my question is directed to Mr Singh. Just in relation to the report on page 417, there's reference to the fact that traffic counts were undertaken during July 2022. What was the duration of the period? And I note that that sentence refers to traffic counts plural. So as long as I understand, there was a count that started on the 1st of July and ended at the end of July. And also, given that July also, the month of July also incorporated gazetted school holidays during the period commencing 2 July this year to 17 July, were those counts undertaken, or did those counts include that period for obvious reasons? Otherwise, well, my concern is that the counting system may have distorted the figures. And can you please explain to me in detail what is meant by dot point number 3 at the top of page 417. There's two interpretations. If you could please explain that in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Singh.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Firstly, the traffic counts were undertaken after the school holidays. They started on 27th of July and they finished on 4th of August, so 7-day period. Okay, the dot point 2 is the percentage of heavy vehicles. When we do the traffic count, it does look at the counts the number of vehicles going over those traffic counters. From the vibration it captures, it will determine whether it's a light vehicle or a heavy vehicle. So from total number of vehicles counted by the traffic counters, 8% is the heavy vehicles, which is mainly the trucks and above.
And sorry, once again, the third dot point, which reads, and I quote, 85th percentage aisle speed, open round brackets, the speed at or below which 85% of drivers are travelling, close brackets, 58.7 kilometres per hour. That indicates to me, and perhaps I've misread it, that 85% of drivers drove at a speed of 58.7 kilometres per hour. But I've obviously misconstrued it. But if you could perhaps just explain that, please.
Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, this 85th percentile means that 85% of the vehicles are driving at a speed less than 58.7 kilometres per hour.
So that means that there are still others who are driving in excess of 50 k's an hour. So wouldn't you target that number of vehicles as a true indication?
Through you, Mayor, I'll probably need to explain that how the council policy on local area traffic management operates. It does consider several factors. It considers the total number of vehicles, the percentage 85th percentile speed, which is in this case is telling us that majority of vehicles are traveling at speed 58.7 or less. And we got a breakdown of different speeds as well. So effectively, 15% vehicles in that area are speeding in that respect, more than going 58.7. The policy will consider that those kind of elements. It will consider the heavy vehicles. It will consider it as a bus route and a few other things as well. And then we calculate a score. And the score in this case has come at 23. Yes, there are some vehicles, which is about 15% vehicles are driving at speed above 58.7. There is an issue. But in comparison to the traffic management scheme which the council considers, this comes in a very low priority order, the score being 23, which means that under the policy, this doesn't warrant any further action at this point in time. The report also highlights that this area is not built out yet. Generally, the policy does not consider circumstances like this one. Policy will consider when the area is fully built out and the traffic patterns are established. Then we determine if there's a traffic management issue and do we need to have an engineering solution. In this case, for the sake of the exercise, we have done this score, and score is also very low.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Just one question from me. What is the score that would be considered to be a priority under the LAT-MP guidelines?
Thanks, Mayor. The score is 60. So it's anything 60 and above would warrant a traffic management scheme. Any with score between 30 and 60 would warrant kind of soft approaches like writing to WA Police for enforcement, employing traffic speed trailer, or a similar kind of signage temporarily.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question goes, Mr Singh, you did the traffic study from Zamir to Templetonia Boulevard. In your report, you indicated that you'll do the study again once Marmion Avenue is connected up through to the future Torapanagono Avenue, which will then connect up to Two Rocks Road. Have you got an indication when that's going to be happening?
Through you, Mayor, I don't have the exact time frames, but I think Marmion Avenue extension is underway at the moment. The other road is meant to be, construction is meant to coincide with the Yanchep rail station connection. So I would expect it will be around 23, 24, but I can confirm that.
Yes, please.
Mr. Singh.
And my other question, Mr. Singh, is when you do the, because I listened to your answers to Councillor Baker, when you do the next traffic count, can you do the traffic count that's using Templetonia Boulevard to Two Rocks Road, because you're indicating that this particular road, Beachside Parade, may drop in numbers because of Marmion Avenue, but that area that's in there, from my understanding, is pretty much built out. So there's a lot of traffic uses the shops and the school there. So it's not really a shortcut from my understanding, but I think we just need to understand where the traffic is going before we can sort of state that, okay, well, some of it's going to go onto Marmion Avenue, where I don't think it will.
Thank you. Councillor Miles. Mr Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think, as I said earlier, once the road network is built, traffic pattern will establish. It generally takes 12 months for traffic pattern to establish. The traffic habits are developed and the patterns are then established. That will be the time for us to start looking at doing more traffic counts in those roads. I think Templetonia probably will make sense for us to do traffic counts, given that it connects Two Rocks Road with Marmion Avenue. So that probably will carry more traffic than any other road. Then North-South Road will be Marmion and Two Rocks, and the East-West will be mainly Templetonia and Lindsay Beach Boulevard to the south. So we'll look at that one once traffic patterns are fully established, and then do traffic counts at that time.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any more questions on that item? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to item 4.12, tender number 22076, Clarkson Youth Centre building upgrade. I just note that there's a confidential attachment, and should there be any discussion required for the confidential attachment, then all recording must be ceased, members of the public exit, and the chambers doors must be closed. Are there any questions on this item? Thank you. Yes, Councillor Miles.
Just to the Director, obviously the budgeted allocation appears to be meeting the tenders out there in the marketplace. Is that an indication that there's a bit of some of the steam in the market has exited, or is it the fact that we've been able to price this at the right time for the build?
Through you, Mayor, I think that question, the response at the moment is not clear at this point in time. Market conditions may have eased, but this is the first tender which we received, which is coming within budget. So I think the test will be in when we go for a couple of other large building projects, and if they come within our cost estimates, that probably will confirm that has the market turned as far as we are concerned.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to community in place. Thank you. What's wrong with surname? Ms Terralink and Mr Kling, are there any items that you would like to speak to?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So there's 4 items this evening from Community in Place, and I was proposing to briefly introduce items 4.14 and 4.17. So in relation to item 4.14, this is the installation of a basketball pad at Longford Park in Darch. So originally it was a proposal or a request to put a 3-on-3 basketball pad and hoop at Longford Park. We did do some consultation in 2019 to understand what the community thought about the proposal, and the majority were supportive of the proposal. As a result of COVID, the project was actually rescheduled to this year, and given that there had been 3 years since the consultation, we did undertake some further community consultation. As a result of that, we received 8 comments through our Your Say page, 7 of which are supportive and 1 which was not. And then we also received a petition that was received by council objecting to the installation of the proposed facility that had 14 signatures, 12 of which have been confirmed as valid in terms of the petition itself. There is obviously mixed community view about this particular proposal to install the 3-on-3 basketball pad and hoop. hence the recommendation to council for consideration.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Are there any? Yes, Councillor Rowe, I think you got your hand up first. Councillor Herridge.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to bring up that I have some new information for consideration indicating that we have actually over 50 residents in support of the basketball pad, and I'm hoping that's able to be considered towards the item.
Yes, thank you, Bear. Yes, obviously we can take into consideration new information that may have been received. If we can do that in time for the meeting next week, then we will do that. If not, we'll probably bring the report to council at a later date. But obviously we'll consider what that new information is and whether we can process that within the timeframes required.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions from me in relation to this item. So the petition that was presented to Council on the 13th of September objected to the installation for several reasons, but these reasons were not outlined in the body of the petition to the best of my knowledge. Can administration advise what reasons were provided by the petitioners for actually objecting to the installation?
Through you, Mayor, there was no further information provided, no specific reasons provided by the petitioners. The wording on the petition basically said for several reasons, but they weren't articulated.
The second question is that the petitioners suggested the playground could be expanded. Generally, playground spaces are used by children between the ages of 4 to 12, whereas a basketball pad would actually cater to adolescents and young adults in the area. Is this a fair assessment?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that would be correct. Normally, playgrounds of that nature would be for the younger age group.
The third question was that I'd like administration to please confirm that the park is located within several kilometres of two secondary schools, being Kingsway Christian College, Ashdale Secondary College, as well as a primary school, being Ashdale Primary.
Yes, through you, Mayor. So the Longford Park is within 900 metres of the Kingsway Christian College, 630 metres of the Ashdale Secondary College and 300 metres of the Ashdale Primary School, and the Kingsway Indoor Stadium is about 1.5 kilometres from the park.
The final question is somewhat of a statement, but I'll word it as a question. I'll word it. I will. I'll have a question mark on the end. You watch. I do. Pinky swear. Given the project was previously approved after a round of consultation, then postponed due to the impact of COVID on capital works, is it fair to abandon a 3-year project due to 14 objections, the majority of which came from a petition that didn't even articulate a legitimate reason?
Ms Terralink.
Yes, through you, Mayor. The report recommendation, as I've indicated, there is obviously mixed views from the community. So the report recommendation is based on the number of people who have indicated through the petition that they don't support the project being greater than the number of people who actually do support the project. But as Councillor Herridge has indicated, she has got some additional information, so obviously we'll need to consider that information in light of the recommendation.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Councillor Herridge.
Sorry, just one more. In considering the space and where it's been allocated to, I believe there was a second option or a first option back for the previous consultation. Is that an option to be open again for us?
Through you, Mayor, yes, we can certainly consider that in light of the additional information that is available. As I've indicated, if we can do that in time for the report next week, we will do that. If not, we will present a further report at a later date.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Are there any more questions on this item? Okay, I'll move on to item 4.15, Rotary Park Play Space Upgrade and Concept Design. Are there any questions to this item? If there are no questions, I'll move on to 4.16, the disbandment of Wanneroo BMX Club Working Group. Any questions? No. Great. We move on to Community Safety and Emergency Management Report, item 4.17, Horse Exercise Provisions, Lot 124, 34, Timely Hostess, Muse, Marigina. Are there any questions to this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yes, very keen to see this one finally come up. Thank you, Director, for bringing it up. My question to you, in the report, it still suggests that there's no formal name for this park. During the process of doing the consultation in the area, is it possible maybe to put, so can you do some consultation at the same time to maybe put a formal name to the park as well?
Through you, Mayor, the reason we're not classifying it as a park at the moment is I do understand that it's freehold land owned by the city that is subject to the strategic land policy. I'm not sure whether Mr Greer might like to comment on that particular aspect.
Thank you, Ms Terralink. Mr Greer?
Thank you, Mayor. The site is freehold land. There's some history to it, which was noted in the report, and essentially just needs some further investigation. It may be that through the investigations we do with strategic land, which we've obviously done for a number of other sites, such as Innes Place and Wade Court and things in the past, in this case it may be that the site is just retained and does become a site used for this purpose going forward. But we weren't in a position to make a quick knee-jerk answer on that. So it was really just flagging that further consideration is needed because it is a freehold land parcel.
Thank you, Mr Greer. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions, I'll move on to corporate strategy and performance. And Claire. Ms Ullman here. What's his name again? Are there any items that you'd like to speak to, Ms Ullman, this evening?
We have 4 papers this evening. The first will be introduced by Mr Patharatna.
Thank you, Mr Patharatna.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the financial activity statement, which is our standard report, the only difference to our normal report to this one is we have carry forward adjustments from prior financial year 2021-22 to 2022-23. So which is detailed on page, we have an attachment as well. Briefly introduce it on the page 476. And the attachment number 6. Also, which is also one of the recommendation. Rest of the report is standard. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions to this item? If there are no questions, I'll move on to any other reports that you want to speak to this evening.
Item 4.20, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Greer?
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, some comments.
Mr Greer, we have some declarations of interest here, I see.
Just, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just noting that I'll be declaring an impartiality declaration of interest on this item for next week.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be declaring the same impartiality interest.
And Councillor Herridge?
And that's me 3.
Okay, thank you, Mr Greer.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, just some brief comments on this item, which was a lease that was considered and approved by Council in February this year. As is the normal practice by a property team, we would provide the lease document to the tenant in advance and seek their approval in the vast majority of cases. We did in this case. We understood we had the tenant's approval. However, after council had approved the lease and the documents were issued to the tenant, it became clear that they hadn't maybe considered it fully, and the position was a bit more complex. So that's explained more fully in the agenda report this evening. But essentially, it's a lease proposal that is substantially the same as what was considered by council in February, with the one difference being a shift from a 50% discounted market rent to a peppercorn rent. I should also note, just finally, that the proposed rental is the same as what the historical lease for this site had, which was a peppercorn lease where the tenant maintains the site. So whilst it's a change from what council approved in February, it is consistent with the position that had been there for a number of decades beforehand.
Thank you, Mr Guerrero. Then questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor Wright.
I just had one from me in regards to a clarification. So basically, the only thing is the council loses obviously the income from what we had before, but we still retain the benefit of the department doing the maintenance works to it.
Thank you, Mr Guerrero.
Thank you, Mayor. That's correct. So the department will maintain maintenance responsibility, which is actually much more clearly understood following the inspection that was done before the February report to council. And obviously then the services should continue under that lease arrangement.
And just one more. So in terms of this, the department doesn't do this for any other current leases. So this would be a special arrangement between the city and the Department of Communities. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr Guerrero.
Thank you, Mayor. The advice from the department is that it's, as they termed it, a legacy arrangement. So they wouldn't put it in place for a new tenancy. And if there was any change to the current structure, they probably wouldn't continue the support.
Thank you, Mr Guerrero. Any more questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Guerrero. I think I am familiar with these facilities, and they were supposed to be handed over to local authorities going forward. Obviously, this one didn't. But it is only a ground rent, as per the so the building is not owned by the city in any way. Is that right?
Mr Guerrero.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, it's the, I suppose, the tenant's building. They maintain the building. The rent was calculated on a ground lease basis.
Thank you, Mr Guerrero.
Just going forward, because obviously there's no information on what the Hepburn Centre does in this report. So is that possible to be included in for next week? So when people do read it and they see that the city's going to forego $13,000, that they can see what other benefits. It clearly states in the report there are other benefits to the community. So therefore, I'd like to see that placed in the report for the benefit of our readers.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Guerrero.
Thank you, Mayor. That's noted. To some extent, this is a revision of a previous report, but I appreciate the point about the services, and we can include that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on this item? Okay. We will move on to item 4.19, transactional finance, the warrants of payments for the period 31st of August 2022. Remembering that questions can be put in writing. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have two questions that I'd like to deliver tonight, and I have several others, but I'll put them in writing. But I feel compelled to raise these two questions because they are very much matters in the public interest at the moment in the community.
Thank you, Councillor Baker.
If I can refer to page 498 of the agenda, the expense item number is 8021, all right? And you'll see what it refers to. But in a nutshell, I received yesterday and the day before several photographs from constituents of dog poo bag dispensers operated by the city, noting that the dispensers were empty and there was a huge sticker which covered the whole of the dispenser. It alleged that the city is experiencing, and I quote, a dog poo bag supply chain blockage crisis. I don't think the word crisis was in there. Will the $9,000 worth of dog poo bags referred to in this expense item help to relieve that crisis and alleged crisis? And also, how much does the city spend each year on these dog poo bags throughout all the parks and dog beach entrances? And also, has the city considered that someone is permanently borrowing a lot of these bags, or that perhaps someone is eating them?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Mr Singh, would you like to respond to this, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I probably will be able to answer that question in part. The first part is, yes, we do have supply disruptions in this particular item. We've been experiencing supply disruption for a while. The issue is we can't order like huge quantities given their biodegradable bags. And if we leave them in stock, we can't basically use them. They deteriorate in stock as well. So we can only order certain time in advance. So there has been supply disruption issues, which has caused us to put some signs on site that we don't have those bags. How much we spend in a year, I don't have the figure right now, but I'm happy to take that on notice and provide that information.
Thank you, if you can. Question
Thank you, Mr Singh. The CEO has a question to put through Ms Terrelink.
He has a question. My dog's got many questions.
Well, perhaps just to provide some additional information in terms of some of the other factors affecting the dog poo bag supply in our parks. I might ask Ms Terrelink. I understand there is also an issue with perhaps some of our community members taking a more generous amount than perhaps is needed, and therefore we run out earlier than our rotation of restocking.
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, there may be anecdotal evidence of that, but we don't have concrete proof that people are taking more bags than is required for their
Can we please
dog's
install
personal use.
tracking devices, please?
Just a question. I think we've got better use for our CCTV than to put them on our dog poo bag dispensers.
That's right.
Have we, Ms Terrelink?
Yes, through you, Mayor. We have limited resources and we need to best apply them where they're going to get the best benefit from.
Which is one tracking device per bag, obviously. Now,
Mr Singh has something further to say about the dog poo bags. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I think our approach is that to request the residents to bring their own bags. Bags are provided in case you forget to bring your own bags. But we do spend fair bit of money on providing those bags, and council has supported that one through budget process. It's not that we don't, but there is generally advice to communities that if you can bring your own, that'll be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor
second
Baker.
question, just the last question.
Yep.
The others will be typed up early hours of this morning. The other pages 494 of the agenda, the expenditure item is 123324. The date of the expenditure was 3 August. The payee was AD Engineering International. The amount was basically $77,000, and it was for, quote, the supply and installation of speed radar display, Nangara Road and Huntington Parkway. That particular electronic device, is it a mobile device or a static device? And if it's one of those digital devices which detects speed and then displays the speed on the digital screen, I just think it just seems very expensive to pay $77,000 for one of those devices. I know that the owners of them, when they install them, when they wreck them temporarily, they remove the wheels. Obviously, they must be very popular in the black market in Perth, but it just seems to be a lot of money for one trial. That's if it is. It could be a static sign. I don't know.
Councillor Baker will take that on notice, I think. Thank you. Okay, we've finished with warrant of payments. We'll now move on to item 4.21, determination of council meeting dates, January to December. Do you have a change?
Just through you, Mayor, can I just highlight a small change that you'll notice when this is represented to the briefing session? We normally do not meet on Easter Tuesday, and I've just noticed that we have scheduled a meeting for Tuesday the 11th. So we'll just make a small adjustment to the timing of that briefing session to move us away from Easter Tuesday.
Thank you. We move on to the Chief Executive Office and start with Advocacy and Economic Development, item 4.22, the Neerabup Industrial Area, Lot 9100 business plan. We'll just wait for Mr Marmion to get comfortable. Would you like to speak to this, Mr Marmion?
Yes, please, Mayor Aitken. Good evening, Mayor Aitken and council members. This report is for council to consider the business plan for a major land transaction for the Neerabup Industrial Area, lot 9100, for approval to advertise. The business plan has been presented to the Neerabup Industrial Area Development Working Group and has also been peer reviewed as outlined in the report. The preferred delivery option recommended in the business plan is to develop and sell, whereby the city develops the site into 41 subdivided lots and then sells the lots to market. However, the business plan also retains the option to sell the land as an in globo development parcel should council decide to do so at a future point in 2023 when more detailed costings and a revised valuation become available. The business plan also indicates that there may be occasions where interested parties prefer to lease rather than purchase, and that the city may consider this option if it arises. The business plan therefore provides enough flexibility for council to make a range of future decisions on the highest and best use for the land parcel without the need to make changes and re-advertise the business plan. Mayor Aitken, I'm happy to take questions on the report.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Councillor Baker.
Thanks very much, Mr Marmion. Just a couple of questions if I can. If I could refer you to page 560 of the agenda. That is page 4 of the draft business plan for this proposed major land transaction. It says that in terms of planning, that the approved subdivision plan for 41 lots, what it says is planning - approved subdivision plan for 41 lots. Has that subdivision been approved? If it has been, what was the date of the approval? Who approved it? The WAPC? Did we approve it, or did JDAP approve it, please?
Through you, Mayor Aitken, yes, that is the subdivision plan that was approved by the WA Planning Commission. I think it was July or August last year. It did come before council yes. Prior to that, but yes, it was approved by the WA Planning Commission.
And just to follow up, if I can, please, Madam Mayor, in the approved plans, there are 41 lots having varying areas, I should say. In terms of the larger lots of 4,000 square metres or more, was that the minimum permitted subdivisional size for lots, or is it still the case that if we sell, for example, a $4,000 lot, that the purchaser may be able to further subdivide it, given the current town planning scheme provisions, please?
Thank you, Mr Marmion.
Through you, Mayor Aitken, my understanding is that we're able to put conditions on those lot sizes to make sure that they're not subdivided again. There's also provision in this business plan, which is just a business plan, it's not the actual what's going to be developed, to potentially some purchasers or lessors may want to combine some of these lots. So that is actually able to be done as part of this business plan too.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Yes, Councillor Baker.
Okay, so, sorry, Mr Marmion, you said that we are able to attach conditions. Is it the case that no such conditions presently exist in the DA that was approved, the approval certificate or DA? As such, how would we then attach those conditions? Through what other methodology? Through what's your view, please?
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Aitken, that would be conditions of sale. That's how we would do
It's
that.
a contractual condition.
Correct.
And would that condition bind subsequent purchases of the land in the future in perpetuity? Or would it be like a restrictive covenant that only applies for 5 or 10 years, similar to the blocks in the old Capricorn estate in Yanchep, please?
Through you, Mayor Aitken, I'd have to take that on notice. I'm not sure what's going to happen in 10 or 20 years when someone else sells.
If I can, just one final question. Are you satisfied that given that the site itself, the original site was of, well, the current parent site was of 16.27 hectares, right? Is this the maximum capital dollar we could extract out of that parcel of land? In other words, have we sought to capitalise as much as we can on this land, please?
Thank you, Mr Marmion.
Thank you. Yes, I understand the question now. So in the current market, these lot sizes were developed as part of the plan just to match what's currently in the market. So there could be some intensification in the future, but if we sell the lots, then we would not have the control over that. It would be more of a redevelopment after the lot had been used for whatever amount of time, say 20, 30, 40 years, and then it will be redeveloped at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Savitton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Following the business case, have you any dates on which you are looking at actually moving towards this, bearing in mind we're following the market at the moment to see where it's going, but after this is approved by council, are there any timelines that you want to start on this, Steve? Thank you.
Thank you for the question through you, Mayor Aitken. Yes, on page 566 of the agenda, there is an indicative milestone schedule which outlines the design consultant procurement, which has already been done. Actually, I'll fast forward to, basically we'll have the approved detailed design and costing early next year. And then we'll have the utility provider's design in April to June. And then at that point, sort of June, we'll obtain an updated valuation advice on the Inglobo lot. And if it's still viable to go ahead with the development and sale model, then we'll prepare the construction tender, and then we'll go out for construction tender. And then as part of the tender evaluation, that's another point where council can make a decision to either develop or stop. So yeah, that's all outlined on page 466.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to governance and legal, item 4.23, enterprise risk management policy.
Thank you, Mayor. This policy has been extensively developed by council, and whilst I'm happy to take questions, I think it reflects council's intent.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this item? If there are no questions on this item, we move to item 5, which is motions on notice, and we have none. Item 6, late reports, and they would be circulated under separate cover, and we don't have any. Item 7, public question time. There's no questions. So we have a question from Ms C Taylor from Yanchep, which has been answered in writing, and that was received in writing. Item 8, confidential. So we need to close the room and ask the staff to leave. Thank you. I declare the confidential session open now. Item 9, closed, I mean. Item 9, the date of the next meeting is the 11th of October 2022, and that will be the next ordinary council meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday, and it will be held at the Council Chamber, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. Item 10, closure of the meeting. I declare the meeting closed at 8:37. Thank you, everybody.